Later this evening, Colt Seavers wrestles a boar for no real reason in The Fall Guy. Before that, a new series of interviews with 80sNostalgia.com. The first guest in the series is the original owner of 80sNos, Mark Reed, a.k.a. B1rdy.
So what are your earliest memories of TV? It's like is it things like Bagpuss or Trumpton, or is it like more Pebble Mill sort of adult themed things?
It would be, well, I think the earliest memory would be the news, actually. The 6 o'clock news in the evening, because that was obviously my cue to go to bed at that young age. So I always dreaded the news coming on, because I knew that was the end of the day for me. It was either 6 o'clock or 5:30. So that would certainly be an early memory. But as far as, the TV I used to watch, obviously Play School. Play School would certainly be one that I watched from a very, very early age. The likes of Playaway. And it was pretty much everything that was... we were certainly a BBC family rather than an ITV family. So it was all the kids' programmes on BBC from about, I think it was 3:30 or 4 o'clock onwards. That's when I was allowed to watch TV.
What do you think the best things were on any channel, not just the BBC?
Well, it wasn't until I was older that I discovered ITV. So, no, back from then, I mean, a lot of the old ones, such as, Button Moon, is certainly one that will stick in my mind because, even at a young age, you realise that was just way too surreal. The likes of Bagpuss, thoroughly enjoyed watching that. Classics like the A-Team and Knight Rider that everyone saw, they certainly stick in the memory. You can remember watching those for the very first time and being absolutely amazed. Back then you didn't know it was going to be the cult programs that we know today. But there was other odd ones. I think the one that sticks most fondly in my mind, and I managed to get some DVDs of it not so long ago, was the Mysterious Cities of Gold. If you remember that one, yeah, that was a long-running cartoon series that has probably one of the best theme musics that was there. And I remember it was either Andy Crane or Philip Schofield that was presenting out of the broom cupboard at the time, was doing the sing-along to that for the introduction. But I remember that series very, very fondly, and I think it was one of the very first ones where I was truly excited. I couldn't wait until the next week to see the next episode. Everything else was pretty much, oh yeah, it's on, I'll watch it. That was the only one that it was the first one that I was really waiting to see.
And how in depth is your 80s TV knowledge nowadays? Do you still remember characters?
Not so much. I mean, I'm getting to that age where I'm considering getting myself into a home. I swear I'm on the border of being senile. The things that I'm forgetting these days. So you can try me. Whether I will remember them or not is a different matter.
I noticed on the site it listed really in-depth things like the names of the mice in Bagpuss. I had no idea they had individual names.
Actually, now you say it, neither did I. But if I put that, then it was certainly there. I mean, it was, when it came to a lot of the TV programs that I was putting onto the site itself, I'd had, good memories of when I originally watched it as a child. I'd then trawl the boot markets to find, videos from back then. And I'd have to watch them again to be reminded. And because I had to write the reviews of them, obviously it was fresh in the mind then. So, things like, where I was, watching that, if any of those character names were mentioned in any of the episodes, because of course I would have watched all of the episodes, then that's the sort of thing I would have mentioned in the review. It's not the sort of thing that a sane human being would probably actually remember, just watching it for fun.
What films do you remember from your childhood as well?
Oh, that's a good one. Because I didn't watch too many movies, to be honest with you. It was mostly, when I was young, it was mostly TV. Parents tended not to watch movies. too much until I was older, and that was the time when you had the old Betamax and VHS war going on, and my dad, being my dad, decided to go the Betamax route, of course. But we would, I think, once a month go to the video shop, and we would take it in turns to pick out a video. So I think the most memorable ones would have been the ones that my dad picked, because they were absolutely awful. One that springs to mind, and I had to go searching for this one, and I had absolutely no idea that it was a cult, was The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Never heard of that one.
It's one to watch, because the reason it's stuck in our mind was it's purely, the storyline is that there's a guy in an airplane, he's flying over something like Africa, it's some deserted country, and he's thrown like a bottle of Coke out of the window. And this tribesman that's obviously, just lived in this desert for his entire life comes across this discarded bottle, and he takes it back to his tribe. And it's basically how they're reacting to this bottle. It was the most bizarre movie that I've ever seen. And when they were chatting about it years ago, brought it up, now with the power of the internet, I went searching for it and found that The Gods Must Be Crazy, it was called, and it had an absolute cult following. So, there was movies like that I remember, but the others, they don't tend to stick in my mind. I don't think I really appreciated a lot of the 80s movies until I was a lot older, when they were already nostalgic. So, ones like Blue Thunder, I think that was another one that I really liked when I first saw it, because that was on par with the likes of Airwolf, except it was a little bit more realistic, the original movie, which I think was also the pilot for it as well, if I'm not mistaken, pilot for the TV series. So it's movies like that tends to stick in my mind.
Have you noticed that young people today have no real concept of the restrictions of 80s TV? Like, they had to be in a certain room at a certain time to watch a specific programme, and if you missed the beginning of that programme, you missed it forever. There's no re-watching that section of programme.
Absolutely. And I think what they really don't appreciate is that, there was a set time for going to the toilet as well, because you could only do that when the ad break was on, and then you were listening out for one of the family members yelling out, "It's on!" and then making the dash back. So you didn't miss it. So back then you didn't have the luxury of the time shifting or playing whenever you wanted to play. You had to be in at a certain time, which was a real nightmare for TV series that were they're on once a week, and they were the ones that had an ongoing plot. Not the sort of the one-off episodes that you could watch that, and it wouldn't matter if you missed the next one or not, because that was a real problem. Because if you had other plans while that TV show was on, I swear it was where the majority of anxiety came from in the 80s.
Yeah, very much. It was quite stressful having to have a deadline to watch a TV programme. It's so bizarre.
It was, but then rich families had the luxury of having VCRs. So that was great, but you very quickly learned that if you're going to set the timer on it, you don't set for it to start dead on the hour and finish dead when the TV time said it was going to finish, because you would end up missing either the beginning, a couple of minutes, or it will cut off a couple of minutes before the end. Because TV shows back then never actually really run to time. So you would always have to set 5 minutes ahead, and then a 5-minute trail at the end, and then hope that you didn't miss it. And then, of course, there was the challenge of actually watching whatever you recorded before your dad had a chance to record over that thing with his golf.
Do you know, one of the memories I've got from school is my friend. He had a long-playing video recorder and a 1-hour cassette. And he wanted to record Alien when it was first being premiered on TV. So he put the 1-hour cassette in, put it on long play so you can get 2 hours on a 1-hour cassette because the film's 2 hours long.
Yeah.
And recorded it. Forgot to press the long play button. So he recorded the first hour. The cassette rewound and recorded the second hour. So we only saw the second half of it, but in really good quality.
That was classic. In fact, I never got to see Alien full way through. You mentioned that it was the first time it was when it was broadcast on TV. And I asked my parents to record it for me. So, yeah, they agreed to it, not knowing what it was, and they decided to watch it as it was being broadcast. And, of course, when it got to the scene where the alien bursts out of the guy's chest, they realised, no, he's not old enough for this. So it stopped recording. So I never actually got to see it when it was broadcast. I think it was like a year later or something. Then one of my friends had it recorded. So it was, it was always a case of all these movies that, your protective parents wouldn't allow you to see. You would, you'd have to go around your friend's house to actually see. I think RoboCop was another one, actually. Can't remember how old I would have been then when RoboCop came out. But Tron was another one that for some reason my parents wouldn't allow me to watch. And I have no idea why. I mean, it might be that my parents have always been there. They're the sort of people that just cannot get to grips with computers, so they obviously saw that as a horror.
So can you settle this playground argument for me? I'm asking everyone I speak to, putting all the votes together at the end and seeing which comes out on top. Spectrum or Commodore 64?
Oh, the Specky. I've got very, very, very fond memories of the Specky. It was my... the ZX81 was actually my very first computer, and that lasted all of one day. Because my parents bought me one for Christmas, and there I am. I've opened it up, and I've sat down, I've plugged everything in, and I've got myself a glass of water, ready to have a bit of a play, and then knocked the water all over the thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I was absolutely devastated. But then the 48K came out, and my cousin got one of those. So I'd always go round to my cousin's house, and we would sit there, not playing games, but we would be typing the programs in from the magazine. So things like, I think, Horizon springs to mind. No, that was the tape that came with it, wasn't it? I'm trying to think of the magazines. Because you used to get all the magazines where you would type in the program from them, and they never turned out the way that you expected them to. There was always syntax errors in there, or they didn't do what it actually claimed that it would do. But, we would have fun typing these things in, trying to get them to work. And then sort of modifying them afterwards. So, we were more into sort of understanding how the computers worked rather than the games themselves. But then my parents decided to buy me one of my own as well, on the promise that I wouldn't be allowed any drinks near the thing. But I remember that obviously you needed to plug it into the TV. So that always caused a bit of contention with, parents wanting to watch the TV themselves. And there I am tying it up with the computer. So eventually they bought me a little TV, and it was, I don't know whether you remember them back in the day. You had these things that were a small TV, a radio and a cassette player all in one.
Yeah, with a screen that's about 3 inches big.
Exactly, black and white. So that's what I ran my Spectrum from for a good couple of years, up to the point where the vertical hold went up the chute. So there I am trying to play games and do a bit of programming on there, with it just constantly sort of wrapping around the screen to the point where Mum said, you really need to get him a proper TV. So, they went down to, I think, the Rumbelows. Was it Rumbelows? Yeah, Rumbelows back then, where you could rent TVs from. So they went down there. Mum found the perfect one for me. Came back home, gave Dad the instructions to go down there and buy it. And of course, Dad, being like most dads, didn't actually buy the one that Mum wanted to buy me. Instead, bought me the biggest one that was there, which was an absolute monstrosity. I think within day 3, the buttons had actually fallen inside the housing. But it worked, and it was my very first colour TV, and it was exceptionally large. So, I have very, very, very fond memories of the Specky. I mean, that was my launching point into sort of computers, up to the point where, you tend to sort of outgrow that, and then went to the Atari ST after that one.
Good choice. I went there as well.
Yeah, and of course you then, after the old fight of, Commodore against the Specky, there was the same fight against the Atari as well. The ST and the Amiga fight that went on. But, in hindsight, it's, as far as gaming is concerned, I think that the Amiga was actually better. The Atari was obviously a lot better for sort of business type stuff, but, kid is going to do business, Particularly for homework. We're not playing around with spreadsheets and things like that back in the day. But no, I was very happy with my ST. Again, ran with that for a few years before then jumping into the world of the PC, because the PC came out of nowhere and just took over the world at that point.
Do you play any games nowadays?
I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore gamer. I have a tendency to once in a while see a game that I'd really like to play, and it will probably be exclusively for a certain console platform. So I'll go out and I'd buy that platform specifically for that game, play it for a couple of weeks, and then get exceptionally bored. And then it would sit there gathering dust. In fact, I've still got an original Xbox and a PlayStation 2 sitting in my living room that I've not actually turned on in years. But lately I've been doing a lot more sort of PC gaming. So I'm very much into sort of flight simulating, so that type of thing, and sort of driving type games. But the latest one I'm playing is the latest Far Cry. Far Cry 6 are we up to now, I think it is. So, generally I wouldn't say I'm a great gamer. I do like the first-person shooters, but everything seems to be much the much. I mean, it's not like the games were back in the day where, some of them were actually pretty unique in the way they worked. And then, of course, you had the really bizarre backstory that they invented on it afterwards. So you would have this game that made no sense whatsoever, and then you would read the inlay card of the cassette, and that just confused matters even worse. As to, where did this story come from?
Have you ever read the inside cassette story for Manic Miner?
No, I haven't, actually. Because I have to confess, whilst I did have a large collection of Specky games, the majority of my collections were on C90 cassettes.
Do you specialise more in legitimate backups than anything?
Yes, we would say that. And obviously, part of the backup method is that you end up losing the inlay card. So, but no, I never had the original Manic Miner, actually. Yeah, I always wondered what the backstory of Jet Set Willy was as well, because, that was a little bit weird in a sense as well, because I seem to recall that the purpose of the game, the end game, was you had to get into your bedroom because you had some woman in there, whether it was your wife or your mother, permanently sending you away. And I seem to recall the end part of the game was then you running to the toilet and throwing up.
Exactly, yeah.
So so I've got no idea what the story was then. But I think back in the day, we didn't really care, did we? We didn't care what the game was about. It was, whether it was, playable and enjoyable.
So what was the best Christmas present you got in the 80s?
Ooh, now that's an interesting one. I think that there was two of them. One was, and I'm going to do my best to try and describe these now, and you may or may not remember them, but one was a helicopter that was on the end of a rod that basically just span round and round. So you had controls as to your forward momentum as it went round in a circle, and then the lift. So you could make it go around, you could make it hover, and then you had a hook on the bottom of the helicopter itself where you could then sort of pick up some cargo, move it around to the opposite side, and then drop it. So I remember playing that an awful lot and really, really happy with that. I can remember that actually the Christmas that I got that. Normally it was traditional to sit down with the family and watch a Bond film. And I missed the Bond film that year because I wanted to play that game. And the other one, it was basically a series of tubes that you connect together, and then you put an air pump at one end, and you had these little spaceship capsules. So you would hit the air pump, and it would then shoot through the series of tubes, in whatever configuration that you made. And there was a big dome in the middle that you could fit into the track, where it comes shooting out of one tube, fly through the air, and then into another. And I really enjoyed playing with that one because, there were so many different possibilities of the way that you could actually set up this track. You could buy additional track pieces, so these little bits of tube. And then, of course, when you got bored with it, you could pretend they were lightsabers with your mates, where it then got broken. So I would say that out of my two, there are two that definitely stick in my mind. There was one toy that I really, really, really wanted, and my dad refused to buy it, and that was Big Track. So I really, really wanted a Big Track, but Dad being Dad, he would only buy me things that he himself would enjoy. So all of the gifts that I got as a child weren't actually for me. They were all actually for him. He would have to play with them first to show me how they actually work. So instead of a big track, he actually got me a remote control car, which was great, but I never actually got to play with it on Christmas Day because by the time he'd finished with his testing and showing me what to do, the batteries had run out. And of course, it being Christmas Day, no shops are open to get new batteries. And I think that was before the times of rechargeable batteries as well. So, yeah, that was a double disappointment that Christmas because I thought I was getting a big track and I never actually got to play with the remote control car.
Oh man, this has saddened me.
Yeah, now I think back to it, it was mental cruelty. My dad was inflicting mental cruelty on me from all angles. I know how I've turned out the way I have. I'm probably going to start having flashbacks now. There's going to be various other sort of memories that now come back of my childhood, and I'm just going to be a dribbling, rocking mess by the end of this, I think.
What was your third favourite 80s song?
Third favourite? Actually, no, I'm going to have to confess. Back when I was young, I wasn't actually into music at all. It wasn't until the 90s that I actually got into music. So my very first CD was bought by a friend, and he gave it to me as a gift. And it was Shake Your Head by Was Not Was.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was my very first CD that I owned. The first CD that I ever bought myself was Tasman Archer and Sleeping Satellite. And it was only from then that I really got into music. So I missed out on all of the 80s. So I'm enjoying the 80s music now after the fact. But yeah, during the time, I really didn't. I think there was only two songs that I did enjoy when I was a kid. One was Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel, and that was because of the video, not the music. I enjoyed watching the video itself. The other one was the Band-Aid song, Do They Know It's Christmas? So that would have been 1985. So I remember that I'd recorded that off the radio, and me and my friend was just playing it constantly. But yeah, other than that, I really don't remember much more of music from the 80s. I certainly wasn't into music back then.
Have you ever met anyone from the telly, from 80s TV?
No, I haven't, actually. No.
Who would you like to meet?
Who would I like to meet? That's a good question, actually. I think I would have liked to meet Mr. T, actually, just purely to see whether his gold was real. Because that did fascinate me at the time as to, was that actually real and how heavy was it? I think that's the only one that I would have wanted to meet at the time. I seem to recall that I did want to go on Jim Will Fix It, but I can't remember what I want fixing. But no, I can't think of, there was, so many people from my childhood. I don't think I could just pick one.
I did meet Treguard from Nightmare a few years ago.
Oh, really? Oh, God, yeah, I remember that now. Yes, now that was an ITV show, wasn't it? So I would have had to sneak watching that when my mum wasn't around.
And do you remember any playground games from the 80s as well?
I can remember, in fact, all the games that you used to play at school have subsequently been banned. So there was two games that I used to play pretty frequently. In fact, no, three. So the very first game I seem to recall was What's the Time, Mr. Wolf? I can't remember what all that was about, other than I think you had to slowly approach someone that would then call out times, and then you would say, What's the time, Mr. Wolf? And eventually they would say dinner time, and then you would all run away. That's the memory I have there. But later into sort of secondary school, that's when the games got a little bit more violent. So British Bulldog was certainly there. I don't think there's a single kid in Britain that hasn't played British Bulldog and hasn't suffered an injury from it. But one of the other games that was popular at my school, we called fence ball. So if you remember the chain link fence, we had a chain link fence against the side of one of the buildings that was, I have no idea why it was actually there. It just, all it did was produce a little bit of an alleyway between the building and the fence. But we realised that if we threw a tennis ball hard enough at it, we could get it to stick in the fence. or go through the fence. And depending upon, what you managed to do. Oh, and the bottom of the fence was also sort of lifted up a little bit so that you could hit the fence and then it would get caught by that lifted up part of the bottom as well. And depending upon what you did, you would then determine what you did with the ball for the next player. So from memory, if it was caught in that little sort of bent around, lifted up bit, you would then bounce the ball back down the playground, and the next player would have to run after it, and then from wherever they were, they then threw at the fence. If you got it stuck in the fence, you could do an underarm throw, and if it went through the fence, then you could do an overarm throw. And then if you smashed a window, the game was pretty much over at that point. It was really good. I think it was unique to our school because we had that fence. Because obviously there was, a wall and a series of windows behind it. So you could have the opportunity of throwing the ball, it going through the fence, and of course you're not running miles after to find it. Because the only other fence that we had in the playground was separating us from the other school, because this school was a boys' school, and then there was a separate girls' school next door. In hindsight, I don't know why we didn't play on that fence, because really at that sort of age we should have been interested in going retrieving that ball. I've got some good memories of that. I seem to recall I was pretty good at it as well.
Stale smells up here often come from down there in your carpet. Smells from your dog and tobacco too. Well, Shake and Vac from Glade is here. It's all you have to do. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. When your carpet smells fresh, your room does too. Every time you vacuum, remember what to do. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. Shake and Vac in 3 fragrances.
So website stuff. What happened in the late 90s that made you want to make an 80s website?
Yes. So it all happens purely by accident. So this was back in, I think, probably about 97, 98, I think. I'd finally decided to get off of CompuServe, as it was back then, and go with a proper ISP, which was Demon Internet. And with that, they gave you some free web space. So you could build your own website, and it would be there on the internet. So being a programmer at heart, obviously taught myself a bit of HTML, put up a rather appalling first website, and I called it Bono Estente. It was my favourite TV show back then, was The Fast Show, if you remember that one.
I do indeed, yeah.
Yeah, that was. So there's various skits, and that was that particular skit with the Bono Estente was them talking in a foreign language, whether it was Spanish or not, but I seem to recall it was complete gibberish, with the occasional actual English word thrown in into there. I enjoyed that, and I had to come up with a domain name, and I came up with that for some bizarre reason. Built a website which I seem to recall firstly consisted of light bulb jokes for some bizarre reason, and then added various other bits and pieces. I think I did a write-up about the Spice Girls because that seemed popular at the time, and none of it would get any hits whatsoever until I decided to wanted to write about the Hair Bear Bunch, the classic 70s cartoon from Hanna-Barbera. So I took a couple of screenshots of the video that I had, did a bit of a write-up, stuck that up, and out of nowhere I started getting hits to the site. Which was really bizarre to see, the online counters that every website had back then suddenly went from 3 up to 30. And I thought, oh, hello, what's going on here? So I did another one for Wacky Races. And again, that started getting some hits. So I'm thinking to myself, well, this is obviously, a popular thing that people want to see, because my hit counter is now up to about 70, which was just mind-blowing at the time. So I thought, right, I'm going to make a dedicated website out of this. And I think at the time I had a job as an internet programmer. So I'd build up the skills for HTML, CGI, and so Perl and things like that. I then just moved on to another job where the company had got in a dedicated T1 line. And it was a pretty small company. And I thought, I'll buy myself a server, I'll set up on there, and I'll have a dedicated website that I've got full control over. And then, of course, came the challenge, as you always do with major projects, of coming up with a name for it. And I wanted it to be something nostalgic. Something, these were all going to be not only the TV programs that I remember, but toys and other memories from back then. So it came down in the end to either 80sNostalgia.com or whitedogpoo.com. And in hindsight, I think I went for the best one in the end.
Are those two options? Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so that's essentially how 80s Nostalgia was born. It came out of those two, the Hair Bear Bunch and Wacky Races, from a Demon Internet personal home space site to a dedicated domain after that. And then, of course, I then started adding more classic TV on there, and it started becoming, very, very popular. I would then add more functionality to it as well. I would link into... there was a company that was selling videos, because this was the time. I think it was a case of right place at the right time, because we're then getting into the era where everyone was doing something nostalgic. You had the BBC that was doing I Love the 80s. You had various other ones that were doing nostalgia shows. So the whole nostalgia thing became very popular at that particular time.
I think I found your website in about the year 2000 when I was making my own site, toonlist.co.uk. And the way I found it was I was on Ask Jeeves.
I remember that.
And I was trying to make my site into a list of every cartoon that had ever been on TV. And my memories mainly of 70s and 80s cartoons. So I was searching for 80s cartoons on Ask Jeeves. I did a search for bod cartoon, and your site came up first. So I went onto it. It was exactly the sort of thing that I was looking to make. So I downloaded all your images, all your bod characters. Then I went back onto Ask Jeeves, did another search for the next thing, Trapdoor maybe, and your site came up as the top result again. So I downloaded all your images. And I thought, I'm just going to take all your images. So
It blatantly suits my content.
Yeah. And then I emailed you, because there's your contact email at the very bottom of the site. And I said, I've taken all your images. I hope this is all right. Let me know if it's not, and I won't use them. And very kindly, you emailed back the day after. And you said, that's absolutely fine, as long as you link to me on any page that you use.
That was you.
Yeah.
I remember that. I didn't realise that was you at the time. Oh, that is bizarre. That is very, very bizarre. I did not know that. I can remember that email, because I can remember thinking that, well, someone's just stolen all of my content, but now they're politely asking. And it was like, well, what can I say? It's a polite ask. So all I could think was, well, providing you give me credit for it, it's more links back to my site. And then back in the day, obviously, that was how you became more popular within the search engines. The more sites you had linking to you, the more the top rankings you actually had. So, wow, that is really bizarre.
But you were one of the only sites that got back to me. Because I went to different sites after that, because you didn't necessarily cover 60s and 70s cartoons. I went to a Hanna-Barbera site, emailed that guy, and asked if I could take some images. He emailed back and said no.
Oh.
So I was like, oh, fair enough. So I didn't use those. Thank you for getting back to me and saying that I can use your images, because I did link back to you, and yeah, it helped my content substantially.
Well, my pleasure.
Did you get many people stealing things from your site, do you know?
Yes, I did actually. In fact, there were a couple of sites that were set up which were a complete duplicate. So they'd not only stolen all of the images and the videos and the sound files, but the HTML as well. So it was a complete duplicate of my site. And I came across 3 of those. And I can't remember what I did about them in the end. I may have emailed them, basically telling them to take it down. I can't believe I would have taken it any further. But I think my one was still the most popular at the time. So it really didn't fuss me. As long as I was still... I was getting the hits in, and they were a level that I couldn't even fathom. So back in the day, bear in mind this was sort of late 90s, so it was just where I think the internet was sort of taking off at that point. You know, I was getting around about 200,000 unique visitors a day, which was, you know, it was unbelievable. And also the people that were emailing me as well. So I'd built up a relationship with some of the BBC researchers because they were doing a lot of nostalgic stuff at the time. And I seem to recall where they asked my permission to put links to it on the BBC intranet, which I thought, wow, that's really good. But I then got an email a couple of days later saying that their manager, unfortunately, won't allow it due to some of the content on my site. So a couple of the write-ups, I'd gone a little bit over the line. In fact, I had a phone call from a lawyer representing, I can't remember the guy's name now, the creator of Bagpuss. Yeah, asking me, he was very nice and polite about it, but he didn't like the fact that I was basically stating that Bagpuss was used for drugs runs. So, yeah, thinking back then, yes, okay, you may have done it. So, yeah, I agreed to change it. And I don't know whether it's still the same today. You may have taken it down since then because I just changed the drugs references to tax evasion instead.
The agreement that you went to give me the site was that I kept all your reviews online, and I have done.
I was really surprised at that, actually. You know, we're so many years on. We're 15, 16 years on now, and you're still running the site. I would never have expected that.
The only review that I have had to take down, because it was quite scathing, was the review for Whizbit.
Really? I had a go at Whizbit, did I? Oh.
Yeah, I got an email from Paul Daniels saying he was unhappy with the way that Whizbit was being portrayed.
He's unhappy, but not a lot.
So, yeah, I did take one down, so I'm sorry about that. But everything else is as you left it.
No, I mean, it's in fact, I should go back and actually have a read of those because I think there was, I mean, at the time, some of the things that I wrote were a little bit over the line. You know, I was young and really didn't have a filter back then and a fairly active imagination. I think Button Moon was another one which... I was basically making references to the fact that it was just purely drugs related. So how I didn't get into trouble for more of them is beyond me, to be honest with you.
All the images on the TV reviews are all captured from footage that you had on videos. How do you go about capturing things back in the early 2000s?
That was, I seem to recall it was a Hopage WinTV card that I had back then, and it cost me a small fortune for the time. But I wanted to, rather than just a screen full of text, I wanted to, have some pictures to go along with it. And this was before the time where you could steal it from other people. You certainly didn't have Google image search back then. So I went out and got myself this TV capture card, plugged my VCR into it, and also realised that I could capture video from it. So I also did the video as well, and that was using Real Player, I seem to remember. And they were exceptionally small files, very poor quality, because at the time everything was dial-up over modem. So I didn't want it so that you would be sitting hours waiting for this video to come down. It needed to be, almost instantaneous for you to be able to play these things, along with the sort of the WAV files as well. So, today you'd look at them and they would just be absolutely appalling quality and exceptionally small as well. But I did an awful lot of them. In fact, I kept all of the videos that I had up until a couple of years ago, where I realised that they were, because of the weather here, the tapes were just degrading like nothing. So a lot of them were just disintegrating. So it was a very tearful day when I just threw them all down the rubbish chute, because I had a good couple of hundred of them, which was a real shame, actually.
The message board you had was entirely 80s for the first couple of years. Then you introduced a non-80s section as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it did. Oh, the board wars. Oh, dear. Now, that brings back some memories. So, so I wanted to add a little bit of interactivity to the site as well. This was, I think, around the area of Web 2.0, where things like this were starting to become popular. So I sat down and I wrote a message board system, where people could, post and reply, and it was fairly basic back then. And it worked well for a while until I started getting sponsorship. And I can't remember the company, but someone was sponsoring me It wasn't for money. I think it was for some goods or discounts on something, but they were fairly controlling. So as soon as the boards turned more into sort of like, people just wanting to discuss their day and random things and non-80s related, I got an email from them saying this is not 80s related anymore. You need to do something about this, which really put my back out, actually. So that's why I then split the board, so that you would have your section, which was purely just the 80s discussions, and then the other part of the board, which was for, all of the community just to meet and talk about absolutely nothing. And as expected, the 80s section of the board was a pretty quiet place from memory. But yes, I remember the board fondly. I can remember some of the fights that used to break out there as well. And I seem to recall that there was some rivalry going on with some other website as well. Yeah, the board thing, that was really what made the site, because that created the community where everyone came together. And then we ended up having meetups. Obviously, there were separate ones for the Southerners and the Northerners. I went to the one that was up London in a railway station somewhere. I can't remember whether it was King's Cross or Euston, possibly Victoria. It was one of the train stations there, and nobody knew that I was coming. So I was the mysterious B1rdy back then. So I'd arrived in this pub in the train station, and everyone's introducing themselves, and here I am. I'm B1rdy, and I was the king, and it felt lovely.
Where did your username come from?
That one, right. Okay, so there's a bit of a story behind this one, actually, as it relates to the site, because originally I was called B1rdy because when I was young, I would get in a flap very easily. So that's why some of the friends called me B1rdy. Because the slightest thing would just set me off. Having ginger hair, I'm sure you know, a little bit fiery. So that's where the nickname originally came from. Now, when the boards happened on 80s Nostalgia, I seem to recall there was one member on there, and I can't remember who it was, that brought up of, "Are you the real B1rdy?" And I was like, huh? What does that mean? And it turns out that there was a guy that did a lot of cracking for the ST back in the day, and he was called B1rdy as well, right? So this guy on the board, and I can't remember his name now, was convinced that I was one and the same. So I continued that pretense right up to the point where he was obviously in two minds as to, whether I was this real person, was or wasn't. So he was now digging up the evidence to prove that I wasn't who I said I was. And it was just so entertaining because, the fact that I was this Atari ST cracking B1rdy came purely out of his mind. But it was just entertaining just to keep him going for so many years. But, to set the record straight, I'm not that B1rdy.
And at what point did you realise that giving up 80s Nostalgia was going to be an option for you?
I was going to move to Singapore. So which was bizarre in itself, because anyone that knows me, my friends, my family, knows that I am not a worldly traveller at all. Back at the time, my adventures outside the UK was a day trip to France and 2 weeks in Lanzarote, and that was it. And then an opportunity came up at work to move out to Singapore. And originally I can remember thinking that there's no way that I'm going to do this, but hell, I might get a free holiday out of this. So, because, it was, they previously sent one of the guys out to New York. They sent him out there for a month just to make sure he liked the place before they did the transfer. So I went along with the thing, fell in love with Singapore the moment I arrived. After the month, went back home, started telling everyone, that's it, I'm moving to Singapore. No one believed me. So it wasn't until I was sort of like packing up my things that I can remember now. Well, I'm going, what are you doing? Where are you moving to? I said, I told you, Singapore. And I think it then sunk in at that time that I was actually going, and it was to the complete opposite side of the planet because, before that first month that I went out there, I had no idea. Singapore where? Is that somewhere near China? Oh, it's right next door to Japan. I had no idea. I really didn't. And to this day, I don't know what was going through my head, because it was so out of character for me just to up my life and move it to the complete opposite end of the earth. But I did realise at the time there that, you know, by doing this was just a significant move. All of my belongings would be floating on the ocean for a good month or two. So I wouldn't have the opportunity to be able to keep the site up to date, and whether I would be able to keep it going moving forward as well. So at that point, I decided that it's probably time to give it up. But I didn't really want to give it up. And I also didn't want to just keep it there and to sort of get stale. So it was at that point, I believe, I contacted you.
You did.
And I don't know why I picked you specifically, actually, because no one else came to mind. It was just purely you. I thought, well, I've got the choice of either shutting the entire thing down, keeping it running but not updated, which would have been a nightmare given the situation on the message boards at the time. You know, I swear, you know, if they continued the way they do, there would be so many lawsuits coming out of it if it was allowed to be run today. Or it was contact you, to-list guy. So that's when I then made you the offer.
That's just really bizarre, because I imagine you'd have other companies getting in touch wanting to buy it off you over the years.
They did, actually. I did have an offer for, I think it was £3,000. But they wanted the domain only. And I just put so much of my heart and soul into the site. You know, I couldn't just give up the domain itself. You know, I would prefer that it died a graceful death rather than someone just butchering it and taking it in name only. So you were pretty much a sort of a last chance of, well, this guy seems interested. I seem to get the impression that you knew how to do a bit of development and you had some passion for this. So I thought, well, what have I got to lose? You know, either he'll keep it just running as it is, or he'll continue to develop it further. Never did I think that 15 years later, it would still be running, and, you know, you would still be adding, you know, new content to it. And I certainly wouldn't see you spinning a podcast out of it either. Just
running through the things that have happened because of it. We've got 40-odd thousand followers on Twitter now. 5,000 people in Facebook groups, got close to 1 million hits and views on YouTube. It is just insane.
It is. It's bizarre where, you know, just something that just started out as a little thing just gets spiraled out of control. I mean, my pet project at the moment has done exactly the same sort of thing. So I've got a YouTube channel that, strictly speaking, should never have any subscribers to it whatsoever. But I've got about 1,500 of them now, because all it consists of is video recordings of car parks. Yeah, the channel is Car Parks of Singapore, and I started it purely as a joke. And what has spun out of that is, obviously, in the great scheme of things, I know it's not an awful lot of subscribers, but it's considerably more than it should be. The number of hits that I'm getting really shouldn't be that volume. I've been on the local TV here in Singapore as well as a guest speaker on a program that is dedicated to car parks. And I just had someone contact me regarding wanting to sponsor as well. So, all because of car parks. And I started it purely as a joke. It was one of those, you know, pub type conversations where anyone can put anything on YouTube these days and it gets hits. And one of the examples that I gave was all of these channels out there where people are recording lifts. You know, they're going into a lift and they're recording themselves pressing a button and then talking about the manufacturer and the date that it was made and, you know, how its little quirks of how it stops on various floors. And that just blew my mind. And at the same time, I just got some new editing gear and I just wanted to edit something together just to play around with my new toy. And the only thing that I had to hand was the SD card from my dash cam. So I plonked a little bit of a video together and I thought, you know what? I'm going to start a joke channel, you know, that's dedicated, it's got car park videos on it. And I went back to my mates going, you know, we were talking about lifts. I can trump that. Some idiot has created a channel about car parks. And that was about 2 years ago. And now it's a very popular channel. As it turns out, because the car parks in Singapore are pretty challenging. They were designed by someone that obviously has never owned or driven a car. They own a ruler, and that is it, right? So if the numbers say a car will fit through that gap, then it will fit through that gap. So these videos are actually proving popular, it seems, to younger drivers that have just passed their test, or even experienced drivers that just want to know that they want to go to a place. I want to see this car park before I go in there. If I don't like it, then I'll go to another one. So it's their way of reviewing whether it's safe to go to this car park and whether they're going to come out of it with any scratches on their car or not. So, yeah, that's where things have ended up. So at any point, if you decide that you want to move your life to Singapore and want to take over a YouTube channel, we can do another deal.
Do you know what? I'm a bit lost for words with that. The fact that that's actually taken off has just blown my mind.
I know. Well, it blew. So when my mates found out that it was actually me, it was all a big laugh and a joke. I'd got 5 subscribers out of it because, I'd forced them to subscribe. And then it just kept going up and up and up. And then overnight, there was one video that got 20,000 hits overnight. And there was no reason for it whatsoever. It turns out that there was an accident outside one of the car parks where someone had actually died. And then obviously everyone's searching online to see whether there's any video of this because people are sick-minded like that. Of course, they've stumbled across my video of the car park where the incident had happened. So I would be really interested to know exactly how much they watched through it before they realised this is not what they came to see and was utterly disappointed.
So 80s-wise, who else should we get on the podcast?
Oh, well, it's more of a question of who's still alive, I think, isn't it?
It is, I'm afraid, yeah, nowadays.
Yeah, I remember back in 2016 was a bad year, wasn't it?
It was horrific, yeah.
They all seem to be dropping like flies back then. So you want to see if you can get Mr. T. Is he still alive?
Yeah. I reckon I know Mr. T by 2 levels of separation.
That's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I can get a message to him, but I know someone that interviewed him.
Yeah.
So I'm counting that as 2 levels of separation.
Yeah. I mean, in this day and age, how easy is it to get hold of these people on Twitter? Because obviously with the advent of Twitter, it just makes it so easy to, if they're actually reading the messages that the fans are sending, to be able to make direct contact rather than having to go through agents and, general gatekeepers, which that would never actually get anywhere.
Yeah, I did speak to John Leeson, who does the voice of K9. And he was the original Bungle as well in Rainbow. And he said he would take part in an interview, but as he was agreeing it with me, the booking agent ran across, deflected him from speaking to me.
Oh.